Second Impact was the experiment that kicked off everything terrible in Evangelion, and it wasn't an accident. On September 13th, 2000, a team called the Katsuragi Expedition went to Antarctica to study Adam, the first angel they discovered frozen in the ice down there. The official story told to the world was that a massive meteor hit Antarctica, melted the ice caps, and killed about half of humanity. But that was a complete lie to cover up what actually happened. Cele deliberately caused Second Impact. They weren't just studying Adam, they were conducting a contact experiment with it. The goal was to reduce Adam to an embryonic state before it could wake up and destroy humanity on its own terms. They used the Lance of Longinus that could suppress Adam's power, and the experiment worked exactly as Cele planned. Adam was reduced to a tiny embryo, but the energy released from this process was catastrophic. The explosion shifted Earth's axis, melted Antarctica's ice completely, and caused massive flooding worldwide. Around 2 to 3 billion people died instantly from the blast, tsunamis, and the climate chaos that followed. Entire coastlines vanished underwater. The world economy collapsed. Wars broke out over the remaining resources. But from Cele's perspective, this wasn't a disaster. It was a necessary first step in their plan. Cele knew this would happen and did it anyway because they needed Adam in a weakened state. If Adam had woken up naturally, it would have triggered Third Impact on its own terms, and humanity would have had zero control over what happened. By forcing Second Impact early, Cele bought themselves time to build the Evangelions and set up their own version of Third Impact, one they could control. Dr. Katsuragi, Misato's father, was part of the expedition team. He realized too late what Cele was actually doing. When the explosion happened, he managed to save young Misato by putting her in an escape capsule, but he died in the blast. Most of the expedition team didn't make it out. The few survivors who knew the truth were either killed or silenced by Cele to maintain the meteor cover story. Second Impact also had another consequence that Cele wanted. It woke up the other angels. Adam's disturbance sent out a signal that activated the remaining angels sleeping around the world. This meant angels would start attacking humanity, which gave Cele the perfect excuse to create the Evangelions and push forward with their real agenda. They created the problem and then positioned themselves as the only ones who could solve it. Creating an Evangelion wasn't like building a robot in a factory. Nerve and Cele developed a disturbing biological process where they literally grew these massive creatures from angel tissue. The process worked like forced cell division, where they would pull a new Eva body directly out of either Adam or Lilith. Old classified documents describe seeing both Lilith and Unit 1 lying stretched out with their lower bodies missing, and those missing parts were joined together. It looked like something was being ripped or grown out of the original angel's body. This process created bodies made of particle wave matter, the same stuff angels are made from. The shape of each Evangelion was determined by genetics rather than by human design, which is why every Eva looks slightly different despite coming from the same source. Unit 1 was the weird exception because it came from Lilith instead of Adam, which made it fundamentally different from all the other units. The Evas were born without souls. They were basically giant empty biological vessels that needed human consciousness inserted later to actually function. Before they succeeded with Unit 0, there were multiple failed prototype Evangelions. These failures had all kinds of problems with their body structure and stability. Some of the failed prototypes had skull shapes almost identical to humans, while others had really messed up proportions or couldn't hold their form at all. Nerve kept these failures secret and eventually scrapped them for parts, using whatever worked to improve the later models. Unit 0 was called the prototype, not because it was the first they tried to make, but because it was the first one that actually worked. What makes Evangelions truly horrifying is that underneath all that armor, they're basically giant living humans. They have complete internal organ systems, including digestive tracts, which was proven when Unit 1 literally ate the Angel Zeruel. You can see their organs when Unit 2 gets torn apart in End of Evangelion. They have fingernails on their fingers and even toes on their feet. When they get hurt, they spray blood everywhere. Massive amounts of red blood for most units, though Unit 2 originally had blue-purple blood in the series before they changed it to red in Rebuild. Every Evangelion has a core located in the solar plexus area, just like the more humanoid angels. Unit 1 actually has 3 cores, one main core and 2 smaller ones below it. The core is where the soul gets inserted during contact experiments, and it has its own supply of LCL that connects to the back of the Eva's head through pipes. Without the core being properly prepared and stabilized with a soul inside, the Eva is just dead meat that won't respond to anything. On a day in 2004, Yui Ikari participated in a contact experiment with Evangelion Unit 1, and something went catastrophically wrong, or maybe it went exactly as she planned. During the test, Yui's body completely vanished, and her soul was absorbed into Unit 1's core. Nerve officially called it a terrible accident, but the more you look at the evidence, the less it seems like an accident at all. Yui's body was never found, not even a trace of it, which doesn't match up with other failed experiments where at least some physical remains existed. The weird thing about Yui's disappearance is that she seemed way too prepared prepared for something that was supposedly unexpected. Before the experiment, she made arrangements for Shinji's care and had conversations with people that, looking back, sounded like goodbyes. Fuyutsuki later hints that Yui knew exactly what she was doing and chose to become one with Unit 1 permanently. If that's true, then she deliberately trapped herself inside an Evangelion, which raises the question of why anyone would do that. The most likely answer is that she wanted to leave proof that humanity existed, since Evas can survive almost anything, even the end of the world. What made Yui's experiment historically important for NERV wasn't just that she got absorbed, but that her soul successfully bonded with Unit 1 and stayed stable. Unit 1 became the only Evangelion with a complete intact human soul inside it, and that soul was the pilot's mother. This wasn't a coincidence. The maternal connection created an incredibly strong bond that made Unit 1 way more powerful and responsive than any other Eva. Young Shinji witnessed the whole thing, watching his mother disappear right in front of him, which messed him up for years, and is the main reason he's so traumatized about piloting. After Yui's successful absorption proved that maternal souls worked, NERV made it their standard procedure. They started deliberately using the pilot's mothers for contact experiments with other Evangelion units. Kyoko Zeppelin Soryu was used for Unit 2, and other mothers were likely used for the remaining production models. NERV had basically discovered that the emotional and biological connection between mother and child created the best synchronization rates, so they exploited that connection by trapping mothers' souls inside war machines and then forcing their children to pilot them. Kyoko Zeppelin Soryu was a brilliant scientist working for NERV in Germany, and she volunteered for the contact experiment with Evangelion Unit 2. Unlike Yui's experiment where the soul transferred completely, something went horribly wrong with Kyoko's. Her soul got split during the absorption process. Part of it went into Unit 2's core, but part of it stayed trapped in her body. This left her physically alive but mentally destroyed, because you can't just split a human soul in half and expect the person to stay sane. After the experiment, Kyoko was never the same. She was institutionalized because she completely lost touch with reality. The worst part was how her broken mind dealt with having a split soul. She started treating a doll as if it were her daughter Asuka, talking to it, holding it, caring for it like it was a real child. Meanwhile, she would look right at the actual Asuka standing in front of her and not recognize her at all. Sometimes she'd even say cruel things to real Asuka, calling her a stranger or an imposter. Young Asuka kept visiting her mother in the hospital, desperately trying to get her to recognize her. She'd tell Kyoko about her achievements, trying to prove she was worthy of being acknowledged, but nothing worked. Kyoko's damaged mind couldn't connect with her real daughter anymore. The part of her soul that knew Asuka was gone, absorbed into Unit 2, and what was left behind was just fragments of a person who couldn't piece together reality anymore. The tragedy reached its peak when Kyoko hanged herself. What made it even more disturbing is that she tried to hang Asuka with her, because in her broken mental state, she thought the doll was her real daughter and the real Asuka was fake. She wanted to take her daughter with her, but was holding the doll. Young Asuka found her mother's body hanging there, which traumatized her so badly that it shaped her entire personality. This is why Asuka is so obsessed with being the best pilot and proving her worth. She's still trying to get acknowledgement from a mother who died thinking her daughter was a doll. The S2 engine, also called the super solenoid engine, is what gives angels their unlimited power. They don't need external batteries or umbilical cables because the S2 engine generates infinite energy on its own. NERV knew that if they could install these engines into Evangelions, they'd have war machines that could operate forever without any power limitations. The problem was that S2 engines are incredibly unstable and nobody really understood how they worked, but NERV decided to try installing one anyway. Unit 4 was being developed at NERV's second branch facility in Nevada, and they chose that location specifically for the S2 engine installation experiment. They picked Nevada because it was isolated in the desert, far away from major population centers, which should have been a red flag about how dangerous they knew this test was. The experiment involved trying to artificially create and install an S2 engine into Unit 4's core, essentially trying to give a man-made Eva the same power source as a godlike angel. The experiment went catastrophically wrong. On the day of the S2 engine installation test, something failed during the activation process. Unit 4 didn't just explode or malfunction, it completely vanished. The entire NERV facility disappeared with it, along with everyone inside and a huge chunk of the surrounding area. It wasn't destroyed in a normal sense where you'd find rubble or debris. Everything just ceased to exist, like it got erased from reality. The blast radius was so massive that it took out miles of Nevada desert along with the base. NERV never publicly explained what happened to Unit 4 or the second branch. They classified the whole incident and gave some vague cover story about an accident. The few people who knew the truth realized that trying to artificially create and install S2 engines was way too dangerous to attempt again. This is why Unit 3 was transferred from the United States to Japan for its activation test. Nobody wanted to do any more EVA experiments on American soil after the Nevada disaster. The US government was probably furious that NERV vaporized a huge section of their country. Rei Ayanami wasn't born like a normal human. She was created in a laboratory as humanity's first successful human clone. NERV used genetic material from two sources to make her: samples from Lilith, the second angel trapped in terminal dogma, and DNA from Yui Ikari. This combination created something that was technically human but fundamentally different from natural-born people. The cloning process gave NERV the ability to manufacture a person designed for a specific purpose, rather than letting biology happen naturally. The Rei that everyone sees walking around isn't the only one that exists. Deep in terminal dogma, there's a massive room filled with tanks containing dozens of Rei clones floating in LCL. These backup bodies are kept in suspended animation, waiting to be used if the active Rei dies or becomes unusable. The clones are all identical, with the same blue hair, red eyes, and pale skin that comes from mixing human and angel DNA. This room was kept secret from almost everyone at NERV, including the pilots and most of the staff. Rei's entire purpose for existing was to serve as a vessel for Lilith's soul. Cele and Gendo needed someone who could merge with Lilith to trigger their version of third impact, and a normal human couldn't do that. By creating Rei from Lilith's own genetic material, they made someone who could survive contact with Lilith and act as a bridge between humanity and the angel. She was designed from the start to be sacrificed in the final stages of human instrumentality, which means her whole existence was just a tool for someone else's plan. Kaworu Nagisa was the 17th angel Tabris, but unlike every other angel that attacked Tokyo 3, he showed up in perfect human form. Cele had somehow obtained control over him and raised him specifically to be used as the fifth child when the time was right. How Cele managed to capture or create an angel that could pass as human is never fully explained, but they clearly had him under their control for years. He was trained to pilot Evangelions, given knowledge about NERV's operations, and prepared for a very specific mission that only he could accomplish. Cele sent Kaworu to NERV right after the Barduel incident destroyed Unit 3 and left them without a backup pilot. He arrived with the highest synchronization scores anyone had ever seen, able to sync with Unit 2 at incredibly high rates without any prior real training. This wasn't normal human ability, it was because he was an angel, and Evangelions are made from angel DNA. He could connect with them naturally in ways human pilots couldn't, which made NERV's staff amazed but also should have made them suspicious. Kaworu's entire purpose was to reach terminal dogma and make contact with what Cele told him was Adam. The plan was for him to trigger third impact on Cele's terms by reuniting with the progenitor angel. Cele designed this scenario where Kaworu would voluntarily walk into terminal dogma believing he was fulfilling his purpose as an angel. They basically programmed him with false information and a sense of destiny, turning him into a weapon that would deploy itself. He was supposed to die in the process, which meant Cele created or raised a conscious intelligent being just to sacrifice him for their plan. The disturbing part about Kaworu is that he was aware of what he was the entire time. He knew he was an angel. He knew he was supposed to reach Adam, and he knew his contact with Adam would trigger the end of humanity. Despite being raised by Cele with this mission programmed into him, Kaworu developed his own thoughts and feelings. He formed a genuine connection with Shinji during the brief time they knew each other, showing him kindness that Shinji desperately needed after the Unit 3 disaster. When Kaworu reached terminal dogma, he discovered that Cele had lied to him. The giant crucified figure down there wasn't Adam, it was Lilith. Cele had manipulated him into going after the wrong progenitor angel, which would trigger a different version of third impact than what angels were supposed to cause. In that moment, Kaworu realized he'd been used as a tool by both sides. He had been programmed with a mission that was based on false information, and completing it would destroy humanity rather than the angels. This is where Kaworu's free will kicked in against his programming. Even though everything in his nature told him to make contact with Lilith and complete his mission, he chose not to. He asked Shinji to kill him instead, because he decided that humanity deserved to live more than he deserved to complete his programmed purpose. Shinji had Unit 1 crush Kaworu in its hand, and Kaworu accepted his death calmly. The Human Instrumentality project was Cele's ultimate plan, and every other experiment in Evangelion existed just to make this one possible. Their goal was to forcibly evolve all of humanity by destroying individuality and merging every human soul into a single unified consciousness. This wasn't about killing humanity, it was about fundamentally changing what it means to be human by eliminating the barriers between people. Cele believed this was the next step in human evolution, and they were willing to end the world as we know it to make it happen. Cele's entire plan was based on something called the Dead Sea Scrolls, which weren't the normal religious texts, but some kind of ancient prophetic documents that predicted the future and laid out instructions for third impact. These scrolls told Cele about the angels, the second impact, and how to use Adam and Lilith to trigger human evolution. Cele treated the scrolls like a blueprint they had to follow exactly, which is why they manipulated global events for decades to line up with what the scrolls predicted. They formed NERV, built the Evangelions, and orchestrated the angel battles all according to this ancient document. The core philosophy behind Instrumentality was that Cele saw human individuality as a fatal design flaw. Every person has an AT field, an absolute terror field, which is basically a barrier that keeps their soul separate from others. Cele believed that these AT fields are what cause all human suffering because they create loneliness, misunderstanding, and conflict between people. Their logic was that if everyone's AT field collapsed and all souls merged together, there would be no more pain, no more loneliness, and no more conflict because everyone would be the same being. The technical process required 3 key components that Cele had spent years preparing. First, they needed Evangelions because these were the only weapons that could generate and manipulate AT fields strong enough to affect all of humanity. Second, they needed Adam to be reduced to an embryonic state, which is why they triggered Second Impact in 2000. Third, they needed Lilith, the angel that gave birth to humanity in the first place, because reuniting humanity with Lilith would complete the cycle. The plan was to use an Evangelion to merge Adam and Lilith together, which would trigger Third Impact and initiate Instrumentality. In End of Evangelion, we see this plan actually happen. Rei Ayanami, who contains Lilith's soul, merges with Lilith's physical body in Terminal Dogma. Gendo tries to force Instrumentality using Rei and Unit 1, but Rei betrays him and takes control of the process herself. She brings Shinji into the decision because she wants him to choose humanity's fate rather than letting Cele or Gendo decide. The result is that Third Impact begins anyway, but with Shinji's psychological state controlling how it unfolds. Once Third Impact starts, every human on Earth loses their AT field. Their bodies physically dissolve and turn into LCL, the orange liquid that makes up the primordial soup of life. People's souls get absorbed into a giant Rei and Lilith that appears in the sky. We see people in the streets, in buildings, everywhere on the planet, physically melting into orange liquid. Their souls leave their bodies and merge together into the collective consciousness. Military forces trying to fight back dissolve. Nerve staff at their stations turn to LCL. Misato dies and turns to LCL. Everyone becomes one. Inside the merged consciousness, there are no more physical forms or individual identities. Everyone experiences everyone else's thoughts, memories, and feelings simultaneously. This is what Cele wanted, perfect understanding between all people because there's no separation anymore. But it also means there's no individual choice, no privacy, and no ability to be your own person. You're not you anymore. You're part of a collective that includes everyone who ever lived. Shinji ultimately rejects Instrumentality while he's inside it. He realizes that even though individual existence causes pain and loneliness, it also allows for genuine connection, growth, and the possibility of happiness. He decides that people should exist as separate beings, even if it means suffering sometimes. Because he's connected to both Unit 1 and Lilith during Third Impact, his choice matters, and the process starts reversing. The giant Rei and Lilith figure falls apart, and the possibility for humans to return to individual form becomes available. The ending shows that people dissolved into LCL can reform their physical bodies and become individuals again, but each person has to actively choose to come back. Shinji and Asuka are the first ones we see return to physical form on a beach covered in LCL. If you like this video, turn on the notification bell and subscribe for more.